Hello and welcome to TheFIX, a podcast about post-processing, Lightroom, Photoshop, other apps and programs, other processes, sometimes non-digital processes, as we shall see with today's show. Essentially, the cool and creative things we get to do with our images after the shoot. I'm Seán Duggan, your host, and on this week's show, my guest is Jill Skupin Burkholder, and she's going to tell us about the encaustic process, which involves using hot beeswax to add depth, layers, and texture to photographic prints. Jill's going to share with us one of her recent projects, which used digital trail cameras and motion sensors to capture the hidden worlds of wildlife that move unseen through the night around us, and how she used the encaustic process to transform these nocturnal images into beautifully textured large-size prints. Stay with us. Well, thanks for tuning in and joining me. Do appreciate that. And I'm really pleased to have my guest with me today, Jill Skupin Burkholder. How are you doing, Jill?
I'm fine, Seán. It's good to be here.
Yeah, you just got back from the land of enchantment. Is that not correct?
Oh, it's exactly right. I'm full to the brim with green chilies. We always like going to Santa Fe.
I love the green chilies. Yeah, and so you taught, well, both you and Dan, your husband Dan Burkholder, taught workshops there for the past couple of weeks. Is that right?
That's right. At Santa Fe, we do the 2.5-day intensive workshops, and I was doing encaustic, both the encaustic for photographers and then kind of an intermediate level encaustic. And so if you don't know what encaustic is, I bet that's the next question, right?
Well, that's one of the reasons why I asked you on, because I've admired your work ever since I've known you, which has been several years now. But in the last several years, you've been doing more of the encaustic. I know you've done a lot of Bromoil type printing. But yeah, tell us, give us a rundown of what encaustic is. I know that it involves hot wax, but if done correctly, it doesn't involve hair removal. Is that correct?
Well, I don't know. It could be a 2-for-1. But in the visual artistic sense, that it does involve beeswax. And so what you do is you have hot beeswax with resin in it, and you work with a hot skillet. And in general, you're putting this over photographs to give a really nice surface to them.
And I've also read that you can also, I don't know if you do this in your process, but it's also common to mix in colored pigments into the wax as well in some cases.
Exactly. You can use different kinds of pigments. And you're right in that I'm kind of a black and white girl. But when I teach encaustic, there's most people that are coming to the class to involve, to put more color into their work and also to have more textures. Mm-hmm. You can use the wax to make peaks and valleys to your heart's content over your photographs.
So similar to how certain kind of thicker paints might reveal the brush strokes or the way that the brush or the palette was used to distribute the paint over a canvas, you can have sort of a similar textural quality to the wax?
Exactly. That's exactly right. And you can use it over photographs that are on canvas, or there's any number of ways that you can print your photograph on rice paper or other materials to put them together into one piece.
Well, that was actually my next question. So you were kind of psychic in that respect. Does the photograph have to be printed on, are certain mediums better than others for having the wax be able to adhere to the photo?
Absolutely. In fact, one of the general rules with encaustic is that most inkjet materials don't work very well because, as you know, the inkjet papers have the coating on top, which prevents the ink from going in. Well, in caustic, one of the big things that we try to do is have all this come together with heat to make one piece. So you like things that are porous. And there's
Right.
a few types of good inkjet materials that will work with the wax.
So can you print on more just sort of art paper, watercolor paper that does not have a coating? Of course, that might not receive the inks quite as well as you would hope, I guess.
That's true. But of course, when the wax hits the paper, it gives it a little bit of transparency. So any of that ink that's gone into the lower levels of the paper is then visible. So the contrast and the qualities of the picture come back. And so it is a real valid thing to use papers that are uncoated and any kind of watercolor paper also.
Right. So is that the primary way that you are doing your own prints? Are you doing inkjet prints, but on specific uncoated papers?
It started out that way, but there are a few papers that I use, including Red River paper out of Dallas is one. There's a polar matte paper that they make that does take wax really well. And there are others too from other companies, but that particular one is what I've been using lately.
And so when the hot wax, fresh from the skillet, right? Just like at the restaurant.
That's right, fresh from the skillet.
When the hot wax hits the top layer of ink, is there any spreading or liquefaction of the ink that is already there, or is it fairly stable?
Not at all. Not at all. It's very stable. And then you do hit it with a heat gun. So you're using a device, the same one that you'd use to peel paint from furniture.
Oh, okay.
So it's a very hot heat gun that you're using to fuse the wax to the paper.
So you apply it when the wax is hot and distribute it around, but then after it's maybe set up a little bit, you're also going over it with the heat gun to further modify it?
Yeah, it's pretty much at the same time. So just as soon as the wax hits it, you're ready to put that very slight layer of heat on there to fuse the image. So it's all in one.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
And particularly when you're using a lot of different layers together.
Yeah, yeah. And so when you say a lot of different layers together, what are you referring to there?
Well, I'm referring to, even though I use encaustic in a rather simple way by putting 2 or 3 layers on top of an image just for the surface, there are a lot of people that will be using it to do collage type layers. For instance, using old letters with photographs or even feathers or plant products or anything to make it more of a mixed media type of a piece.
Oh, I see. And so as you put the wax down, you might then put some other element of ephemera, paper, an old letter or a feather or something like that on top of that, then put more wax down and then build it up that way.
Absolutely. And you can really tell who has been working with encaustic for a while because it's hard for photographers to think in more of a 3D direction. In fact, in some of the classes that we do, it's mostly photographers in the classes, and we're really trained to go from, say in the old days, it's developer, stop, bath, fixer, and wash. And so it's very linear all the way through. So one of the things that you have to kind of shake loose in some of these classes is that whole feeling that it's not just one directional, that you can scrape things off and you can go upwards from the surface. And that's a big deal.
Huh. So when you say scrape things off, so after you put something down, you can decide, oh, this is interesting, but I really would rather maybe try it over here. Or you can do that.
Exactly. And there's some encaustic artists and painters that take off as much as they put on. So they're leaving just little flecks maybe of color from a previous layer. So it has a lot of possibilities.
Wow, that's really interesting. And does the wax have a kind of an inherent natural color to it that it brings to the piece?
Only a little bit of yellow in general, just because it is beeswax.
Right.
That you do usually try to get a wax that's has more of a white color to it. But in general, it's just a little bit of a beige tint.
And so I noticed, and we'll be looking at some of these in a little bit, but I noticed that on some of your encaustic works, there is that kind of warm, yellowy to beige sort of hint of color. Is that just coming from the natural beeswax then?
It is, but I also like a little bit of warmth in my black and white work. So you see a little bit from the Photoshop work, and then you see some also from the wax.
Okay. So that's kind of like harkening back to maybe your days printing with more warm tone black and white papers.
Yes, that's true. Yeah. And in general, what I am drawn to in photography are any of these processes that deal with paintbrushes. And back from the first real type of technique that I really enjoyed was the Bromoil printing. And so that was, maybe back, I guess it's been about 20 years ago that I started doing the Bromoil process.
And that's like a perfect segue, because I was going to ask you about that. And so are you still working in that, or are you mainly working in encaustic right now?
I haven't done much Bromoil work in the last maybe 2 years, just because it seems like every 2 years a paper disappears, or you have to kind of rework the way that you do it. And so that's been a little bit of a hindrance in that. Well,
that has often been the way of the artist, or at least specifically, I'm sure it happens in many different art mediums where certain materials and papers and, pigments or whatever just kind of are discontinued or whatever. But it's certainly true for photography, where you've been printing on a certain paper for many years, and then either it goes away or they change it in such a way that it behaves differently than it used to.
Exactly, because you probably know this, but just to catch people up, Bromoil is printed on regular silver gelatin paper, and then you take that through the normal process, except that you're using a non-hardening fixer. And so once the paper goes through the process, you do a bleach to where all the silver is removed, and then the gelatin itself takes up water, and the water is taken up proportionally between the high and low areas. And
the tonal, you're talking about the tonal values, right? The high key and darker areas, yeah.
Exactly. And so you want that gelatin to be able to react. And of course, in modern papers, that might not be as good a thing. You want paper that is very stiff and hard and maybe can be shipped from wherever that it was made across the world. And so these gentle papers that we need are kind of in short supply.
So it sounds like Bromoil is maybe a little bit more of a involved process to make it in terms of the components that you need to do it. Is that a fair assessment?
It kind of is, but as you know, with all of photography now, which part do you like to do?
Yeah.
I mean, if you like sitting in front of a computer and printing straight from that, then that's one way of doing it. If you want some time in the darkroom, then you're going to be going to one of these other processes. And so, yes, it's more involved, but that's the part that is a lot of fun when you can go in the darkroom. And you can, once that's over with, you can sit with your paint brushes and your stencil brushes, and your lithography ink is involved. And so, what do you want to do?
Yeah, that's true. Follow your muse.
Yeah.
So, but it seems to me that if somebody was interested in bringing more of a textural, tactile quality to their work, and had no previous experience in a traditional, wet darkroom, chemical darkroom, that encaustic would probably be a kinder, gentler way to explore an alternative printing or reproduction process than something like Bromoil. Am I on target there with that, do you think?
I didn't catch the first part of that. You're saying that Bromoil would take a little more energy to do, and you'd have to catch up with your darkroom knowledge in order to do it. Is that what you mean?
Right. So I was envisioning somebody who might be interested in doing, working the textural or tactile qualities of a more alternative reproduction process into their work. But if they had no darkroom experience at all, obviously they'd have to deal with that in order to get into something like Bromoil or any of the other type of alternative photographic processes.
It's true. And of course, there would be people that would disagree with this statement, but, can you do it within the computer? Can you get that same Bromoil look? I'm not sure. I do Bromoil partly because I enjoy the process. And so I like seeing the ink and I like to see the brushes reveal it a little at a time. And that's purely selfishness on my part. It's that moment that I'm enjoying when I'm making the print. And I do believe it might be possible to get a really good Bromoil look just from any number of apps or computer processes involved.
Yeah. Well, I totally understand that because, as you know, I photograph with that wooden pinhole camera.
Right.
And I do, my Artifacts of an Uncertain Origin series and other subject matter with my pinhole camera. And of course, I finish those off in Photoshop in terms of the split toning that I do to them. But, frequently I'm asked the question, well, why do you go to all the trouble of using that wooden camera that has no viewfinder and you're using film when you could just sort of, create an effect in Photoshop and it would be so much easier. But, as you mentioned, for me, it is all about the process of, the act of actually using that rudimentary camera to go and make images rather than just sort of, applying an action or a filter effect in Photoshop.
Well, it's true. And I think it's important to point out that it's not because difficulty is better than ease, just because certain processes are hard to do, it really depends on what you like to do in your time. You choose. And you might choose an easy process because you like the smell of whatever solutions you're using. And that's okay too.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, well, it's, for me anyway, and I'm sure for you and for a lot of artists, the art making process and the creative journey to come to that finished art piece is oftentimes just as important, and in some cases more important than the actual finished piece. The finished piece may be very satisfying and beautiful, and you really love it, but you treasure the journey that you took to get there just as much.
Absolutely. And I think there are times when you go to a process because you like the look, but you're not going to stay there if the activities that lead you to that look aren't fun in the process. You're lucky. You're lucky if you like the look and the activity together. That's what you'll stick with.
Yeah. The process has to be rewarding in some way. Otherwise, it's just suffering.
Yeah, exactly. But there are people that like to suffer too, right?
Okay, sure, yeah. That's a fine old trope and cliche. The suffering artist suffering for our art.
Yes, exactly.
So it seems to me that Encaustic is kind of enjoying or experiencing a bit of I don't know if revival is the right word, but it seems to be. I see a lot of it these days in terms of the popularity. Is that a fair assessment?
It is a fair assessment. And I think one of the reasons is what we've talked about before in different discussions, in that people are looking for something to do with their hands. It's not purely just the digital satisfaction that we're made to make things with our hands and react with it. And so that's part of it. And then also, the encaustic world has been relegated to the craft world in a lot of ways, and it's being elevated a little bit because you have artists that are in more of a fine art sphere that are using encaustic, and I think that's done a lot for bringing the whole process to more people.
Mm-hmm. How this is kind of an off-the-wall question, but I'm just going to ask it now because I know that if I don't, I'll forget about it later on.
Okay.
Given that the encaustic process uses wax to create, the piece, how stable is that once it has, cooled and hardened and stuff like that? I mean, how careful do you have to be about hanging a piece up, in a window that's going to get, sunlight coming through on it?
Well, you went right to the window thing. That's how I was going to end up that answer, because the way that you start out with any questions you get about the encaustic process is, of course, you're going to try to keep all fine art at a room temperature. You're going to be maybe in the 70 to 80 degree range at most in general. Mm-hmm. So the wax that we use, you're talking about, it's going to be very stable to maybe 150 degrees. And so unless you're leaving it in your car, and running into lunch somewhere, then you're probably going to be just fine. And as far as the stability of wax in general, it is such an old process. You talk about beeswax sealing the urns on the Grecian ships, beeswax is a wonderful type of solution. It's not UV tight. You have to be careful with that.
Yeah.
But as far as it being stable, it's a wonderful ingredient.
Yeah. Well, this is actually kind of a good point to maybe talk about one of your latest projects. And before we get into looking at the images, let's just get a little bit of background. This is a series you did of wildlife in your area there, which is in the Catskills area of upstate New York. So why don't you give us a short little kind of capsule overview of how you got that idea and how you went about it, and then we'll take a look at some of the images.
Yeah, as you know, my husband is Dan Burkholder, and he pretty much explores apps nonstop from the middle of the night to the next morning. There's always something. And so he stumbled on this one app that's called Instant Wild. And I think that it's still on there. And it was done by the London Zoological Society. And what it involved was trail cameras, or motion sensitive cameras that are in different parts of the world. And so you can start this app and pretty much just watch for different images that are coming up with wildlife. And that fascinated me, that whole idea. And so after following that for a while, I decided that I did want to do a project based on that, and did even contact them and used a few of their images in the early work, but I wanted to take it to the Catskills. And so I did get a trail camera that I was able to put out to the Catskills and get my own images of the wildlife.
So as I understand it then from reading about this on your website, and correct me if I'm wrong, the way that this works is the camera is transmitting the images that it takes to a website or a server somewhere, and then you can actually access those on your phone. It pings you or notifies you when there's been the motion sensor has been triggered. Is that it?
Yes, it sends the image directly to my phone. And that was the most fascinating thing to me during the project is, I would even leave my phone by my bedside, because a lot of this, of course, is happening at night with the wild animals. But you would get a notice, and essentially you're getting a text from a bear or a text from a few raccoons that are hanging around. And that part, I think, is great. And
so do bears and raccoons use emojis in their text?
I won't tell you.
Well, that's fascinating. And so does the camera store the images locally on the camera, like on a memory card on the camera, or is it just uploading them?
It's only sending you a low res version, and so it is also going onto a card. And so it's another way of knowing if you need to go check your camera and to get the card so that you can get the higher res versions of the images.
Yeah. And what, just out of curiosity, kind of getting into the geeky technical part of it, what was the resolution of the pictures that it captured in terms of like pixel dimensions?
It was, it was an 8 meg camera. Okay. But it was doing a lot of interpolating on that image. So, we had to do some testing on that to see, but I don't recall the pixel dimensions because we were upsizing it quite a bit for what I was doing.
Yeah. Well, listen, let's fire up the screen share and let's take a look at some of the wildlife that has visited your neighborhood.
This first image, I'd like to show you what camera I'm using. This is a Scoutmaster, and so this is what the actual camera looks like.
Wow, it looks very kind of G.I. Joe in its
Doesn't
aesthetic.
it? Exactly.
Totally. I can imagine. It looks like a sort of a G.I. Joe walkie-talkie I might have played with when I was 9 years old.
Well, that's right. You didn't know what you had there, but it is the type of camera that it does an infrared flash, and so you get some very interesting. Of course, in the middle of the night, then it uses the flash and you see the animals. But particularly right at sunset or sunrise, it has a really nice look because it's kind of combining the normal light with a little bit of infrared. So it's a lot of fun. And of course, there's it has the antenna, which is sending it to my iPhone, which, as we've talked about, that was just really one of the best parts about the whole thing.
So obviously then this, at least in order to send the image to the iPhone, you do have to be using it in an area where there's a cell signal.
A signal, yes. Well, in fact, in one of the images that I'll be showing you, it has a story behind it in that I had it in someone's backyard for a few days, and I thought, he said that there were a lot of turkeys there, and I waited and no, I had no signal. So I went and picked up the card, and I had 1,400 pictures of turkeys walking back and forth in front of the camera.
That's kind of like one of those be careful what you wish for scenarios, right?
It sure is. Now, let me go ahead and show you what the actual picture looks like. This is how it would be captured by the camera. Mm-hmm. So this, in fact, is just outside of our backyard. And this is a coyote. And you can see at the bottom that I took this one. This was at night on July 25th, 2014. And
it was 19 degrees
It was
Celsius?
Celsius, yes. Okay, so that's how it was captured. And then now I want to show you what I did with this image, because remember, I was just taking this raw image, and then this is the final form.
Oh, wow, that is lovely. It almost looks like you are it to get almost a negative image. Is that?
Oh, you know your Photoshop, don't you? Exactly. I am inverting it. Now, there are a few of these images that you'll see that the animal, such as the bear, you wouldn't want a bear looking like a polar bear. So on some of those, it's not as inverted, but on this one it is. And the whole idea behind it. Well, I was just Go ahead.
No, you go ahead. You finish your thought.
Well, just the thought is the way that I do the invert, it just gives it much of a fairyland look to it. Again, the name of the whole project is the Hidden Catskills. So it kind of makes it look like it's another world.
Yeah, no, I can see that. I mean, obviously, and then you get the little visual boost of creating a lot more contrast between the shape of the animal and the background, especially if it's darkened at night.
Yes. Okay, how about another one? How about this one?
That's a curious bear there.
It is indeed. And in case you're wondering, the camera was just fine after this encounter. So you see that he got right up to it.
Do you think that the bear was actually investigating the camera, or this is just sort of a coincidence that he was up that close?
Oh, no, absolutely. I mean, they're extremely curious. So it really was. And this is I was talking a minute ago about the look that these have when it's right at sun. This was close to sunset. Mm-hmm. And so you see the bear is nice and dark, but the background does have that nice infrared look to it. Yeah,
no, that looks really cool.
Okay, and here's another one.
And was the bear on your property, or was this?
No, that was off into the Catskills. Yes.
Oh, okay.
And so let me show you this one now. This is a fisher. And of course, he looks really cute, but the fishers are the ones that you have to keep your cats indoors around here because they're very vicious little animals.
So is that kind of like a in the weasel family of animals, exactly. or a marten?
Yes. And just to say a little bit more about the project in general, you notice that there's something over there in the right. I was working with trappers during this whole thing. And of course, they're the ones that know how to bring the animals to certain points. And also, that was the whole idea behind the project. I got a grant to help with the project through our the Greene County Council for the Arts in New York. And their thought was that I'd be working with these different communities that usually aren't involved in art projects. So that was kind of taking the art out to some different groups, and I enjoyed that part of it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I imagine that the trappers are probably you're familiar with this technology now. I'm sure that they've used that before themselves. Yes,
they're using the cameras to kind of check out different areas. But they were, as you know, many times it's the hunters and the trappers that, although they're using the animals for different reasons, they do have a love of nature and they have an incredible amount of knowledge on where the animals are.
Yeah.
So
I love the background in that one. Just the faint kind of hint of those ghostly trees in the back.
Yes.
And how large are you reproducing these when you put them up for exhibition?
Well, these are encaustics when I get finished with them. They're 2 by 2 feet, and so 24 by 24.
Yeah.
And so they're printed on good inkjet paper and then mounted on a wooden panel. And then there's some enhancement that's along the edge. You'll see the different carbon and graphite look along the edges of this to distress it a little bit. And that's actually physical powder that I'm putting on the edge, and then the wax on top, usually 2 or 3 layers.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and next, here's a rabbit. It's funny to tell you what these are. I think you know what they are when you see them.
Yeah, most of them probably. Although the fisher, I'm glad that you clarified what that was.
Yeah, I like this one in particular in that he's leaving the frame. That's another choice. Of course, I had thousands and thousands of images, and I'm the one that's choosing which ones that I want to put out there. And the ones where it almost looks like you're looking in as an outsider, where they're either going somewhere or looking elsewhere in the frame. That's what kind of intrigues me.
Right, it's almost like you're looking through some sort of magical camera or device that is giving you this glimpse into, as you titled the series, that hidden world.
Yes. And in general, my work's always been about that. This happens to be a hidden world that is the world of nature, but it is a recurrent theme of mine. So it's interesting how this ties in. And also just the fact that it's on the iPhone. We kind of walk around with hidden worlds in our pocket, even if it's your mom that's going to text you or whatever. It's a fantasy world that we have all the time. It's just that this is one that gives us access to the nature.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. Well, I live in an area, that's also rural. We live up in the Sierra foothills, up, about an hour from Lake Tahoe. So, it's probably not that different from where you are in terms of, forests and lots of deer and fox and bears and occasionally mountain lions and stuff like that. So it makes me, I know a lot of what passes through our property at night, just because I sometimes see them. But it would be interesting to set up a camera and actually to see, well, what is going on there?
Right. Yeah. And that is the fascination on that. Now,
so what kind of an animal is this that is leaping through the frame?
This is a deer.
Oh, okay. So obviously a slower shutter speed, probably because it's shooting at night.
Mm-hmm. Right. And, you know, there were some very clear images also of the deer, but I just loved the more romantic freezing of his motion as he runs off.
Well, you know, the other thing too that it calls to mind, this is of course, you know, once you get into learning about photography and the history of photography and the work that other photographers have done, you start to sometimes see parallels or echoes or whatever of other photographs. And I'm sure you can guess what photograph this calls to mind for me.
Well, I've heard.
Any ideas?
I have heard the suggestion of Caponegros running deer.
There you go. That's it. Yeah, Paul Caponegros.
Ding, ding, ding. Do I win a prize
deer.
or anything?
Yeah, you do. You win a virtual gold star.
Excellent. Well, let's see what other images I have here. Here's another one of the bear. I call this one Little Bear versus the big bear that we've already seen.
Mm-hmm. And this is by and large, these are all nocturnal images, right? Yeah,
by and large, but then of course this one was right at sunset, so he's nice and dark as he would be, and so there was no need to invert this to give it that fairyland feel. It was pretty much straight over the camera, looking like this. Okay, and next we have 3 raccoons.
Wow, that one on the right is really well defined in terms of the facial features.
Yes, and I don't know what problem that one on the left has, but it looks like he's really talking about something.
Maybe he's coughing up a fur ball.
Oh, that's beautiful. Lovely. I'm going to go back to my negatives now and see if I get the next frame. And then I'm going to make you a copy of it.
or maybe they're like they're eating fish and he's got a bone stuck in his throat or something.
Oh yes, I'm sure that's it. All right.
I'm sure that is a peril in the raccoon world. That's a reality that raccoons have to deal with.
Well, I'm glad you see the mystery and beauty in this one, Seán. Okay. I'm going to the next one, which I can imagine what you'll say to this one.
It's the photobombing squirrel.
It is indeed. You know, there's whole apps built on this sort of an image, right?
Yeah. Well, you know, it's funny. Squirrels are you know, and obviously there are many photographs of squirrels interacting with cameras, but they do seem to have this awareness of like the eye of the lens of a camera, because you do see pictures of squirrels so often where they are like looking right into the lens.
I hadn't noticed that, but I will now. That's for sure.
Yeah. He looks like he's spoiling for a fight. You know, he's kind of like looking all tough and got his, you know, he's ready to dive into action there.
It could be. Okay, this is
so Jill, when you're making, knowing that you are going to take them into the encaustic process, are you doing anything special in terms of how you might process them in Photoshop to get them ready for the encaustic process?
Only if it's going to have 2 or 3 layers of wax on top. Sometimes I'll over sharpen it just a bit, because there's a certain amount of fogginess that will happen with the wax on top. But that's the only difference.
Mm-hmm. So that looks like a beaver. Right? Am I right there?
You are right. Yes.
Right. I get a virtual gold star.
You do. You get your award back after the deer shot. No, I like this one because I think it has the whole feeling of like the Revenge of the Killer Tomatoes kind of thing, that the house is in the background and he just looks like such a monster.
Yeah. Well, you know, the other interesting thing about this is that if you view it almost like as a flat image, it almost looks like it could also be one of those illustrations that's like a cross section that shows you, oh, well, here's the lawn, and then here's what happens underneath the ground, you know?
Oh, that's true. I hadn't really looked at it like that before. Yeah. And if you think about it, this was an interesting one in the capture of the image, because we had the camera on a post that was actually stuck in the beaver dam. And so we were really taking a chance with this. In fact, after we got a few of these, we went and got the camera right away, just because we were afraid that he was going to kind of do a little editing on his own and take the camera down, because they're always moving sticks around.
Yeah, you wouldn't want your camera to end up in the pond.
Exactly. Okay, we'll go to next one. You remember the turkey story that I told you?
Right, that's one of the 1,400 turkeys.
This is one of the 1,400 turkeys, exactly. Yes.
Wow, that is a wonderful composition. Those turkeys did a fine job.
Well, when you have 1,400 pictures to work with, you can have your choice.
Yeah. It sounds like the name of a band, actually, 1,400 turkeys.
It does. Yeah, but I like that one walking in front. You can see how they just went back and forth in front of the camera for days.
Yeah, that one's really cool.
And I just have one more of those to show you. And this one is a fox.
Oh, beautiful.
This has that whole ink on paper look to it, and it's a good example of the whole fairyland look that I was going for.
Yeah, no, that really comes through in that picture quite strongly. And so that kind of dark, shadowy look around the side, that's the graphite powder and charcoal, you said, that you mixed into the wax?
Yeah, particularly on this one, it's more the look that's at the top. The plant products that are over on the side, they were just close enough to the fox to catch a lot of the flash. And so if you could think about the whole thing before it was inverted, those would be kind of bright white from the flash. But then when they're reversed, it gives it that inky quality. And so those are the ones that I pulled out for you. So that's a pretty good summary of that particular project.
Yeah.
Now, actually,
yeah,
one more thing that I'm not sure that you could see, but one whole night, that fisher that we were looking at came and went back and forth in front of the camera, and I did piece all those together in a short movie. And so if you were interested in seeing that, I could show that to you also.
Oh, yeah. If you have that, sure.
So I have here a little movie that's put together with all the different stills showing the fisher coming and going. And that's a little bit of meat that's there to lure him in. So isn't that fun?
Yeah. Yeah, that is fun. You can make your own little, it's almost like a stop motion movie there with all those frames.
Kind of a Charlie Chaplin look to it, but yeah.
Yeah. And of course, the classic glowing eyes that happens when the flash goes off.
Yes.
Oh, I like that little bit there where he was, or she, it looked like they pulled on something and it kind of stretched out a little bit.
I know. It's kind of the Lady and the Tramp spaghetti scene.
Yeah, that's what it looked like.
Yeah. So
you weren't giving the fisher spaghetti, were you?
No, I was not. I'm afraid that's part of a beaver carcass if you really want to know the whole thing.
Well, thanks so much for sharing those. That it was great to hear some of the backstory. I'd seen the images before on your website, but it was great to hear some of the process and adventures that went into making the images.
Yeah, it was a great, fun project, and it was a lot of fun, and I'm glad that we could show it to you.
So you have some encaustic workshops coming up in the coming year, and as we mentioned at the beginning of the show, you just got back and you had a couple in Santa Fe, but where else are you going to be teaching in the months ahead?
I'm doing a workshop here in Palinville, New York, in our studio in July, and that's at the 1st of July. That's a 2-day workshop where you learn the basics of encaustic and how to use it with your photography. And then it's followed up by more of an intermediate level. Like usually people want to just stay and play for a couple of extra days. So that's here. And then at the end of July, I'll be at Photographer's Formulary in Montana, also teaching encaustic and photography. And then ending up the year with a workshop with the Il Chiostro group in Tuscany, and that'll be in September.
Oh, man, that would be nice. Go and photograph in Italy and make encaustic prints. Do you have to bring your own beeswax, or can you get your beeswax locally sourced there?
We do bring it in. We have each person bringing a couple of pounds each to make sure that some of it gets through TSA.
Yeah. It's chalk it up to strange things to explain to the TSA why you're traveling with these things.
That's right. Usually I mark it with some sort of craft projects or crayons, and usually they let that go through just fine.
Yeah, I too, with some of the strange things that I've carried around for my artifacts of an uncertain origin project, I've put labels on them that said, this is photo props, and I'll put my photographer's business card on there. And because some of the stuff, I had this one thing that I carried with me a couple times on transatlantic flights, and it was all these, and I disassembled it so it was not put together, and I had these parts in separate bags, but it looked like it could have been a bomb.
Well, you've got all your clock faces and all that. I can see that would be a problem. But
it was this weird old wooden box. It's crazy.
Well, they don't want to do paperwork. If you give them any kind of reason to let you go through, it usually works out.
One of the funniest things that happened to me once, I was flying to Las Vegas, and I had a stack of about 30 old 78 records. From the 20s and 30s. Uh-huh. Yeah. And they were in my carry-on because they were really fragile, and when I was going through security, who has the large round object that we cannot see through in their luggage?
Oh, and of course you stepped right up.
I did. No, I did. I was a stand-up guy. Yeah. I said, yep, that would be me. And they asked me, what is that? And I said, it's a stack of about 30 old 78 records. And they believed me, and they didn't look.
No. We don't want to hear that.
I know. I was like, well, hey, okay.
Well, I'm glad you got
Maybe
the answer, at least.
Yeah, it's true. And the plane arrived at its destination.
Good.
So in addition, speaking of travel, you also have another workshop, I believe, coming up in November. It's not an encaustic workshop, but you and Dan are going back to Cuba. Is that right?
Yes. That's not encaustic, but it's just a shooting vacation. A vacation workshop. And we went back in the spring, and we took a group, and we had a lot of fun, and we got to go back. As you know, everybody's trying to get back, and in case there's any changes that happen, it's a good time to go.
Yeah, well, I'm sure there's going to be changes. That's just that's a constant. So, well, great. So, Jill, where can people find out more about you out on the web and see more of your work?
They can go to my website, which is www.jillskupin.com, and that's JILLSKUPIN.com.
Okay, great. And I will put a link to that in the show notes, as well as a link to the project that we talked about here, the Catskills project. But there are several other really interesting projects on your website. Some of your Bromoil stuff. I love the Circus of Memories collection, and also some of the shots you have in people and places. Really beautiful work.
Thank you. I hope somebody goes there and looks around a little more.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for stopping by. And the encaustic process is intriguing to me, although I don't know if I have time for it in my life right now. But thanks for giving me a little bit more of an insight into what goes into creating those images.
Well, I'm glad that you're curious about the beeswax. We'll have that and maybe a trail camera in your backyard and get you going.
There we go. And you just spoke a line that can be I can put in my about the author statements. Curious about the beeswax. There we go.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Seán.
Well, that wraps up another episode of The Fix. Thank you again for tuning in and stopping by. Hey, if you are watching this on our website, which is thisweekinphoto.com/TheFIX, please subscribe to the show. There's a box over on the right-hand side of the page where you can do that. And if you want to get in touch and leave some feedback or maybe some suggestions or requests about future topics for the show or future guests that you'd like to see featured, you can get in touch with me directly by using the Contact Us link at the top of the page. Just click on that, and in the little web form that pops up, make sure you open the menu and choose the name of this show, The Fix, and I will get that message. I'm Seán Duggan. Thanks very much for watching. Catch you next week on The Fix.